It wasn't thunder. That's what Sheriff Thomas Granger kept telling himself. Every time the wind rattled the windows of the old station house. The storm had rolled in the night before, cold, fast, and mean, but something about the sound woke him different. He'd served 2 tours during the war, seen men fall from trees like broken apples. He knew the sound of pain when it whispered. And this wasn't the wind. It was something buried, something breathing beneath the ground. Coda knew it too. The old German shepherd hadn't left the porch since dusk. Just sat there, ears twitching, head tilted toward the horizon like he was listening for a ghost. Then came the letter. No stamp, no name, just a wrinkled envelope left under the front door. The sheriff picked it up with his calloused fingers and opened it with the edge of his badge. Inside was one sentence, scribbled in a shaky hand. The children still cry beneath her floor. Pine Hollow, Tennessee, was the kind of place where nothing happened fast, unless it was a tractor race or a barn fire. Folks there trusted what they could touch. Fresh milk, Sunday sermons, their neighbors' silence. Margaret Dawson had been part of that silence for nearly 20 years. She ran the Dawson farm, a sprawling plantation-turned-orphanage just outside of town. Big white pillars, rocking chairs on the porch, chickens roaming between hydrangea bushes. Every Christmas, she dressed up like Mrs. Claus and passed out toys downtown. Every Easter, she fed the homeless at the church hall. People called her Mother Dawson, said she was a saint in a state with too many devils. Sheriff Granger never liked saints. That morning, he drove out to the Dawson place with Coda riding shotgun. The storm hadn't finished chewing up the sky. Clouds rolled overhead like wet concrete, heavy and slow. "Don't know what we're looking for, boy," the sheriff muttered, rubbing Coda's neck, "but you let me know when you find it." Coda whined low in his throat, already staring at the barn. The place looked too clean. That was Granger's first thought when Margaret Dawson met them at the gate. She wore pearl earrings and a shawl that didn't match the mud on her boots. Her smile was tight, her eyes tighter. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" she asked, voice sweet as pecan pie left too long in the sun. "Just a courtesy visit," Granger said, tapping his hat. "Storm's rolling in hard. Wanted to check on the kids." Margaret hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course. We always welcome the law." The children were lined up in the dining room, about a dozen of them. Clean faces, folded hands, plates full of warm biscuits. They looked fine, too fine. But Coda didn't care about the biscuits. He walked slow, nose to the ground, ignoring every open door, every quiet smile. And then he stopped at the barn, low growl, tail stiff. He pawed at the threshold like something was beneath it. "That's just storage," Margaret said quickly. "Old tools, rusty nails, dangerous stuff. Not for the children." "I'd still like to take a look," Granger said. She forced a smile. "Of course." The barn was silent. Even the storm went quiet when they stepped inside. Coda sniffed the floorboards, circling a worn patch near the far wall. Sheriff Granger tapped it with his boot. Hollow. "Do you use the basement?" "We don't have one," Margaret said flatly. Coda barked once, sharp like a gavel slamming down in court. Margaret flinched. But when Granger pushed on the boards, nothing gave. No trapdoor, no hinges, just old wood and dust. Still, Coda wouldn't leave. Later that night, back at the station, Granger stared at the letter again. He couldn't sleep. Neither could Coda. The dog paced in circles, restless, head low like he was tracking something that couldn't be seen, only felt. At 2:13 a.m., he let out a low bark and sat facing the window. And that's when the sheriff heard it again. Not thunder, not wind, a whimper. Distant, wet, real, like a child trying not to cry. Hey there. If this story has gripped you so far and you want to hear the rest of what Coda uncovers, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to our channel, Heroes for Animals. We bring you powerful, true, and inspired stories every week that honor the instincts, intelligence, and heroism of animals who change human lives. Subscribe now, because sometimes the real heroes don't speak, they bark. The next day, Sheriff Granger took a walk through town. Everyone was talking about the Dawson Spring fundraiser. Posters were already up outside the feed store and the diner. All proceeds go to feed and clothe the orphan children, they said, with Margaret's face beaming like she'd already been canonized. That's when he saw Eliza May, small girl, maybe 10, hair the color of spilled ink. She'd been placed at Dawson Farm a year ago after her mother's overdose. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just slipped a folded piece of paper into the sheriff's coat pocket and walked away. He opened it inside the diner behind his coffee. They take us when the train whistles. Please listen to him. He knows. No name, just that sentence. But he knew where it came from. The whistle blew every Thursday night at 10:05 p.m. on the freight line that passed near the Dawson property. He looked down at Coda, who had followed him inside without being asked. The dog was staring at the train schedule on the bulletin board. Granger didn't believe in signs, not really. But this wasn't a sign, this was a pattern. That evening, Granger went back out to the Dawson farm. Alone. Margaret met him with practiced charm. "I wasn't expecting visitors tonight." "Not a visitor," he said. "This is official." He handed her a folded inspection order, signed by the county judge. Margaret's eyes didn't even flicker. "Very well," she said. "Let's get this over with." He made her walk him through every room, the bedrooms, the kitchen, the cellar, which, mysteriously, now existed but had nothing but dust and broken furniture. Then he asked to see the barn again. Margaret hesitated. Just a second. But that second was enough. Inside, the light was dim. Coda bolted toward the same floorboard and barked 3 times. Granger pulled a crowbar from behind a beam. He wedged it under the old plank. It gave, and beneath it was a latch, a rusted iron ring, hidden under a thin layer of straw and time. Granger looked at Margaret. She no longer smiled. Coda growled low. Sheriff Granger's hands were steady as he pulled the rusted ring upward. It gave with a reluctant groan, like the barn itself didn't want him to know what lay beneath. Dust exploded into the air. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness, stale, dense, and absolute. Coda didn't bark this time. He simply lowered his head and growled. A sound not meant to warn, but to mourn. "What is this?" Margaret Dawson asked, her voice paper-thin. "That's what I aim to find out," Granger muttered. He pulled out his flashlight and pointed it downward. Old wooden stairs descended into blackness. Cobwebs danced in the beam like lace dipped in sorrow. The air smelled like rust, mold, and something else. Something wrong. "I'll need you to wait outside, ma'am," Granger said. Margaret didn't argue. She didn't even move. Granger nodded to Coda. "Let's go." The dog stepped into the dark without hesitation. The stairs creaked under their weight. Each step felt like a page turning in a story that nobody wanted read. At the bottom, Granger found a dirt floor and stone walls. The space was small, about the size of a tool shed. There were empty crates stacked in the corner and a single chair bolted to the ground. Chains hung from the wall beside it. Their metal rusted and quiet now, but not long ago, they had moved. Coda sniffed the floor, then lifted his head and pointed his snout to the far wall. Granger followed the beam of his flashlight. That's when he saw it. A smear of red, dull, old, but unmistakably blood. He stepped back slowly, not in fear, but in fury. He took a long breath and whispered, "We're not done." When they came back up, Margaret was gone. Granger slammed the trapdoor shut, pulled his truck around, and called for backup. Deputy Eli Boone showed up 20 minutes later, chewing sunflower seeds and acting like it was all a drill. "You sure you're not overreacting?" Boone asked, kicking a stone toward the chicken coop. That woman's a saint in this town. Built the school's entire roof with her own money. Granger pointed toward the barn. There's a room under there, Eli. One with chains and blood, and no mention of it in any town record. Boone blinked. Damn. Granger looked him in the eye. We're bringing in state authorities. Don't breathe a word of this to anyone. Not the mayor, not the reverend, not your cousin at the diner. Nobody. Boone nodded slowly. Understood. Later that night, the wind shifted. Not just the weather, the mood in town. Word hadn't gotten out officially, but Pine Hollow had ways of smelling trouble. The folks at the general store noticed Margaret Dawson hadn't picked up her order of flour and lamp oil. The town librarian whispered about seeing her pack up books in a hurry. And little Eliza May? She didn't show up to school that morning. Granger went back to Dawson Farm the next morning with a signed warrant. The place was still. Too still. No children laughing in the yard. No kitchen smoke. Just silence and the crows circling above the barn. Inside, he found open drawers, furniture knocked over, a single boot by the front door. She had run, but she didn't take them all. Coda found the second door behind the pantry, a false wall, hinges rusted from the inside. Granger braced his shoulder and broke it down. Inside were 3 children, dirty, starved, silent. One girl looked up at him with wide eyes, a bruise on her temple, a missing front tooth. But she didn't cry. None of them did. They brought in the paramedics and social workers, the local doctor, even the pastor, who looked like someone had stolen all the light out of his heart. These kids, he said, voice cracking. I baptized 2 of them myself. Granger didn't answer. Because in the barn, under that trap door, Coda had found more. Beneath the dirt floor was a second layer, a wooden hatch sealed with iron nails. Granger and Boone pried it open. A passageway ran under the property, long and narrow like a forgotten vein. And along that tunnel, they found 7 more children. Alive, but barely. The state arrived 2 hours later. FBI, DHS, a convoy of black sedans and white vans. The media didn't show up. Not yet. But it wouldn't take long. Granger stood on the porch and watched as agents in suits walked in and out, carrying boxes, snapping photos, making calls. One of them, a woman from Nashville named Agent Rivera, walked up and asked to see the dog. She knelt in front of Coda and scratched behind his ears. He found all of them? She asked. Granger nodded. He doesn't stop, he said. Not until he knows they're safe. That night, Granger stayed at the station past midnight. He read every case file Dawson Farm had submitted over the years. Adoption papers, foster licenses, clean audits, glowing reports from state inspectors. All of it a lie. Some children had been adopted by families that didn't exist. Others had died from illness without death certificates. Some were listed as transferred to out-of-state facilities that had no record of them ever arriving. It was a shell game, played with lives too small to fight back. At 2:03 a.m., the train whistle blew. Coda stood. That's when it hit Granger like a bullet through his spine. They take us when the train whistles. Eliza's note. That sentence. He grabbed his coat. The old rail spur behind the Dawson property hadn't been used in years. Not officially. But Granger had grown up here. He knew the routes, the shortcuts, the places where secrets went to die. He drove without headlights, parked behind the tree line. Coda was already growling, and then he saw it. A wagon, covered, moving slowly toward the tracks. Granger pulled his rifle and stepped out. He moved through the brush, Coda beside him. There were 2 men unloading crates from the barn. Each one marked farm equipment. But when one crate shifted, something inside screamed. Granger didn't wait. Hands in the air, he yelled. Sheriff's office. One man ran. Coda leapt after him, pinning him to the ground with a snarl. The other raised his hands, too slowly. Deputy Boone arrived seconds later, breathing hard and swearing. We got them, Granger said, opening one crate. Inside was a child, drugged but alive. They found 6 crates total. Only 3 had children inside. The others were empty. Margaret Dawson was still missing. The next morning, a black envelope showed up at the station. No name, no return address. Inside, a photograph. A woman's hand holding a boarding pass for Charleston, and a Bible verse scribbled on the back. And no one sees the tears of the righteous when they fall. The sun barely broke the horizon when Sheriff Granger returned to Dawson Farm with a federal warrant in hand and Coda at his side. The barn smelled different now, like smoke and pine tar. The kind of smell that lingers after something's been scrubbed too clean. Too late. What they found the night before had already peeled back the first layer of rot. But Granger knew, deep in his bones, that the truth went further. Deeper. "You ready?" he asked. Coda didn't bark, just stood, ears forward, body still as stone. Inside the barn, federal agents were already hard at work, photographing, scanning, tagging. The wooden floor near the rear wall had been torn open, revealing the trap door Coda had discovered. But Agent Rivera from the FBI stood near a new corner. "There's something else," she said. Granger stepped closer. The floor beneath her boots was slightly warped, like it had been replaced more than once. The boards weren't aged like the rest. They were too perfect. Boone approached, chewing a toothpick nervously. "Coda's been sniffing this spot since we arrived," he muttered. "Refused to leave it all morning." Rivera handed Granger a crowbar. "Want to do the honors?" Granger didn't hesitate. The wood popped up with a crunch, exposing a second, smaller trapdoor. This one was metal, heavy, bolted shut with a thick iron latch. Rivera stepped back. Coda let out a low growl, not of aggression, but grief, like he already knew what was on the other side. They unlatched the door and peeled it back. A cold breath rose from below, thick and damp like the breath of a grave. A narrow spiral staircase descended into pitch black, the kind that swallows light and doesn't give it back. Granger clicked on his flashlight. "I'll go first," he said. Boone looked uneasy. "You sure?" "I've walked into worse." Coda stepped in without being asked, tail lowered, body tense. The descent was slow. The air grew colder with every step, pressing in like wet cotton. The walls were lined with stone, jagged and old. No recent construction here. This was part of the original foundation, long before it became an orphanage. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a room, roughly 20 feet wide. Stone walls, dirt floor, metal tables pushed against the edges. Jars filled with yellowing fluid lined crude wooden shelves. Bones floated inside some. Others held tiny, pale hands or eyes frozen mid-stare. Boone nearly lost his breakfast. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. Agent Rivera covered her mouth. This is a lab." Granger moved forward, hand on his holster. A journal lay open on one of the tables. Ink faded, pages wrinkled with moisture. It was a logbook. Names, dates, notes in tight, clinical handwriting. Subject, EM, age 9, high tolerance. Muscle fiber exceptional. Subject, JR, who age 11. Respiratory failure after test 4. Boone flipped the page. Subject, KL, no family records. Transferred to Hargrave facility. Granger's jaw tightened. "Hargrave? Who?" Rivera asked. "Town doctor," he growled. "Been here 30 years. Rivera pulled out her phone. "I'll run his file." Coda wandered to the back of the room and barked, sharp and urgent. They followed him to a second tunnel, narrower, just wide enough for a man to walk hunched. Rivera looked at Granger. "You want to go in?" "Not yet." He turned to Boone. "Get every agency on the line. We've got more than child abuse here. We've got human experimentation." Outside, the news was spreading. Not officially, but in Pine Hollow, truth traveled faster than trucks. Parents came knocking on the sheriff's office door, holding faded photos of missing kids. "She was here," one mother sobbed. "I know she was. Margaret took her after the fire." Church groups held vigils. The mayor called for calm, and the school board canceled all classes until further notice. But Granger wasn't at the office. He was on the road to Hargrave's home. Dr. Walter Hargrave lived in a colonial house 2 miles from town. Big porch, ivy-covered chimneys, white fence that squeaked in the wind. When Granger and Coda arrived, the gate was wide open. Too quiet. He knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. He tried the handle, unlocked. "Coda," he whispered, "stay close." The dog moved ahead slowly, nose low. The living room looked normal. Bookshelves, leather chair, framed degrees from Yale and Johns Hopkins. Then Coda growled at the floor vent. Granger knelt. The smell hit him first. Chemical rot. He pulled the grate free. A note was taped beneath it. "Some knowledge requires sacrifice. Don't come looking." The house was empty. But the back shed? That wasn't. Agents found vials, restraints, syringes, and a hidden panel beneath the floor containing files. Dozens of them, each one labeled with initials, photos, measurements, notes on subjects' reactions to pain, drugs, surgeries. Boone couldn't speak. Rivera had to step out for air. Granger read one and froze. Subject L.A., age 12. Vocal, resistant. Believed to be leader among group. Transfer delayed pending buyer instructions. Luisa Aguilar. Eliza's full name. Granger turned to Rivera. "She's still here. Somewhere. They haven't moved her yet." "We'll find her," Rivera promised. But Coda was already running. The storm rolled in again. Clouds boiling low. Trees bending in protest. Coda led them through the woods behind Hargrave's property. 3 men followed with rifles, flashlights bobbing in the dark. They came to an old root cellar, half collapsed and hidden beneath brush. Coda barked and dug at the edge. Granger helped pull the door open. Inside, in the dark, was a girl. Tied, gagged, but alive. Eliza. Her eyes met Coda's and she smiled. They carried her out as the rain began to fall. Cold, hard drops like nails from heaven. Eliza clutched Coda's neck and whispered something no one else heard. But Coda stood taller than he had all week. Granger looked at the men around him. "I want roadblocks on every county border. Hargrave's gone, but we'll find him. And Margaret Dawson? If she so much as steps into a train station, I want her name ringing alarms from Tennessee to Texas." Boone nodded. "You got it." Back at the station, Granger stood in the evidence room surrounded by files, names, photos, and memories of children no one remembered, except for the ones who still cried in the dark. He stared at the wall where a new bulletin board had been pinned up. At the top was a photo of Coda. Below it, a quote handwritten by Eliza that afternoon. "Some heroes don't need to speak. They just need someone to listen." The storm rolled out the next morning like a tired thief, quiet, heavy, and leaving behind only what it couldn't carry. Sheriff Granger stood on the front steps of Pine Hollow's tiny station house, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented tin cup. The weight of what they had uncovered in the past 72 hours hadn't settled yet. Maybe it never would. Children locked underground. A doctor with blood on his hands. A woman praised for her charity now wanted in 3 states. And yet, most of the town was still in denial. "I think people want to believe monsters don't wear pearls," he said aloud. Behind him, Coda let out a soft huff, laying down next to the deputy's desk. His fur was still damp from the rescue last night, but his eyes were clear. Watchful, waiting. The FBI set up shop in the town's old post office, unused since email replaced mail carriers. Inside, Agent Rivera organized case files like a battlefield general mapping a siege. "This is bigger than we thought," she told Granger. "Much bigger." She slid a map across the table. Red pins dotted Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana. "These aren't just missing child cases," she continued. "They're all tied to either Margaret Dawson, Walter Hargrave, or shell charities they supported." Granger traced a line from Pine Hollow to Baton Rouge. "What's down there?" "A clinic," Rivera replied. "Fronted as a children's research facility." shut down in 2019 after whistleblower reports. Guess who sat on the board? He didn't need to guess. Margaret Dawson's name was no longer just a stain on small-town gossip. It was on federal bulletins, border alerts, and news tickers across the South. She had vanished with surgical precision. No digital trail, no credit card use, no confirmed sightings. But Granger knew she'd resurface. People like her didn't vanish. They just moved the curtain and built a new stage. And the freight line? It was still running. That night, Boone returned from checking the old Hargrave property with a look like he'd swallowed a cactus. "You're gonna want to see this," he muttered, dropping a stack of photos on Granger's desk. Black and white prints, taken from a trail camera hidden behind the tree line. The first showed a covered wagon leaving Hargrave's back lot. The second, time-stamped 2 hours later, showed the same wagon at the old Cottonwood rail yard, abandoned since the textile mill closed in '92. The third was the one that chilled the room. A man in a wide-brimmed hat, loading crates into an unmarked rail car. And standing beside him, hand on his sleeve, was Margaret Dawson. Granger slammed the phone down. "Wake up every breathing agent within 60 miles. I want boots on that yard in 20 minutes. Boone raised an eyebrow. "You want me to call Nashville too?" "No," Granger said, grabbing his hat and keys. "This time, we don't wait for red tape." The Cottonwood rail yard looked like something out of a ghost story. 3 rusted tracks, a collapsing station house, a tower that leaned like it regretted standing. But the railcar wasn't a ghost. It was there, mid-track, connected to an old diesel engine that looked like it hadn't moved in years. Granger, Boone, Rivera, and 2 federal agents moved in from opposite sides. Coda was low to the ground, hackles up, nose twitching hard. As they approached, a shout rang out. "Hands where I can see them!" A gun fired. The echo cracked across the yard. Granger dove behind a rail crate, firing once in return. Rivera rolled into position, motioning for her agents to flank. Boone crouched behind a barrel, yelling, "We've got hostiles! They're armed!" Coda didn't wait. He lunged past the barricade and disappeared into the railcar with a growl so sharp it cut the air in half. Inside the car, chaos unfolded. 2 men stood over crates. One reached for a shotgun, but Coda was faster. He leapt straight at the man's chest, knocking him flat. The weapon skidded across the floor. The second man ran. Coda didn't follow. Instead, he went straight to the largest crate in the center, scratching wildly, barking in bursts. Granger burst through seconds later, Boone close behind. "Cover the door!" Granger shouted. He yanked open the crate. Inside, wrapped in a wool blanket and barely conscious, was a little boy, no older than 6. Granger blinked hard. It was Noah Garrett, missing for 5 months from a church picnic in Louisiana. His photo had hung on a wall in the sheriff's office since July. Granger scooped him up, handing him to Rivera as agents swarmed in to secure the scene. "Get the medics now!" she yelled into her radio. Outside, the sirens began to howl. In total, they rescued 6 children that night, all drugged, all tagged with paper bracelets marked only with initials and weights. Inside a small box near the conductor's seat, agents found shipping manifests, coded but decipherable. Dozens of names, ages, destinations, prices. One column labeled simply, "Client approval, yes, no." Back at the station, Eliza May sat curled in a blanket next to the heater. She hadn't said much since they found her. But when Coda walked in, she smiled again. He laid beside her without a sound. Granger stood nearby, sipping his 4th coffee of the day. "You ever see a dog read people that way?" he asked Rivera. She shook her head. "I've worked with K9 units across 3 states. I've never seen one this intuitive. It's like he's tracking souls, not scents." Granger nodded. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Over the next 48 hours, Pine Hollow transformed from a quiet town into ground zero. News vans lined Main Street. Reporters swarmed the courthouse lawn. Federal trucks rolled in with new agents, medical teams, and trauma counselors. And Margaret Dawson? Still gone. But the noose was tightening. They found her car at a truck stop outside Birmingham. Abandoned. Cleaned of fingerprints. Inside the glove box, a burned phone and a page torn from a children's Bible. "Do not weep for me, for I have already paid." Late that night, Granger sat alone in his office. The bulletin board now stretched across an entire wall. Names, faces, connections. He stared at a photo of Margaret Dawson accepting a civic award 10 years earlier. Everyone behind her smiling. Children at her side. He ripped it down. Coda padded into the room, ears flicking toward the creaking wood of the hallway. Granger looked at him. "You think she's gonna run forever?" Coda didn't answer, but his gaze turned toward the window. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Not stormy this time, just cold, empty, and warning. They found her in Kansas. Not in some abandoned shack or under a fake name. No, Margaret Dawson was sitting on a church pew, wearing pearls and sipping tea with the town's women's ministry. She'd joined them 3 days earlier under the name Mrs. Evelyn Trask, claiming she was a widow from Charleston, looking to serve God and bake pies for local fundraisers. That's how monsters move when cornered. They don't vanish. They just switch masks. Agent Rivera got the call at 5:14 a.m. By 7 o'clock, a federal convoy rolled into Cedar Grove, population 1,108, and plucked Margaret Dawson off that bench before the church choir finished their second hymn. Sheriff Granger was waiting when they landed back in Tennessee that night. She didn't look scared when they led her down the hallway of the Pine Hollow station. Just tired. Tired like someone who'd spent a lifetime dodging judgment. Granger stared at her from the other side of the glass. She looked up, smiled faintly. "You've lost weight, Thomas," she said. He didn't reply. The interrogation room was quiet. One overhead light, a pitcher of water, a recorder on the table. Rivera sat across from her. Granger stood in the corner, arms crossed. "You've got one chance to cooperate," Rivera said. "One. No deals, no mercy, just the truth." Margaret took a sip of water and looked toward the two-way mirror. "I always thought I'd die before anyone figured it out," she said calmly. "Shows what I know." Rivera leaned in. "How long?" Margaret's eyes softened. 31 years. Granger felt the blood leave his face. Rivera pressed. "Why?" Margaret gave a small, humorless laugh. "Because people like you never look where the ground is soft." Outside the station, a crowd had gathered. Not a protest, not a vigil, just townspeople. Mothers, teachers, the mailman, kids standing on tiptoes behind fences, watching, waiting, listening for answers. Granger stepped outside and faced the reporters. "Margaret Dawson has been taken into federal custody," he said, his voice gravel. "She is being charged with conspiracy, trafficking, and the abuse and endangerment of minors. This investigation is ongoing, but I can promise you this." He glanced at the barn in the distance. "This town will never let something like this happen again." Inside the sheriff's office, Coda sat beside Eliza May. She still didn't talk much, but today she handed him a drawing. Coda, the barn, a child climbing up from the dark into the light. She tapped the corner of the paper where she'd drawn a paw print and smiled. That week, the FBI expanded their search to 3 more states. What began in a barn in Tennessee had now uncovered a cross-country trafficking network disguised as medical research and charitable adoption. They found financial records, emails, even encrypted video logs showing children being inspected by wealthy donors from overseas. One video file was labeled Client, MB, London. Requested subject, heterochromia, age 8. Delivery expected 7/12. Meanwhile, Margaret Dawson sat in her cell, calm as ever, while lawyers from 5 different states tried to claim jurisdiction. Her words from the interrogation played on loop in Granger's mind. People don't believe it when the evil smiles at them. The trial began the following month at the federal courthouse in Memphis, televised nationally. Granger testified. So did Boone, Rivera, and 2 of the children who had been found in the train yard. But the moment that silenced the courtroom was when Eliza May walked in, dressed in a navy blue dress, hair brushed, holding a small stuffed dog in her arms. She didn't look at Margaret. She looked straight at the judge. "My name is Eliza May," she said softly. "I remember everything." And then she told them about the nights underground, about the visitors with gloves and flashlights, about Margaret's voice above the trapdoor telling them, "Good children, stay quiet." Coda sat in the hallway outside the courtroom the whole time. The press tried to photograph him, but he didn't pose. He just waited, loyal, like always. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all 28 counts. Sentencing deferred to allow for additional charges from other states. As they led Margaret away in handcuffs, she turned to Granger one last time. "You were always too curious, Thomas." He didn't answer, but Coda did. He barked once, sharp, final. Back in Pine Hollow, the cleanup had only just begun. The barn was sealed and scheduled for demolition. The tunnels would be filled in, but no one forgot what was buried beneath those floorboards. The town held a service in the square that Sunday. A plaque was placed under the old oak tree, in memory of the voices that were silenced, and in honor of the ones who spoke anyway. Below it, a bronze cast of Coda's paw print. Federal investigations continued for months. 27 arrests were made across 5 states, including doctors, judges, and 2 former state senators. A clinic in rural Arkansas was raided. 4 children were recovered. Every one of them remembered hearing a train. Eliza May was adopted by Agent Rivera 6 months later. She started school again, had a dog of her own now, but she still asked to visit Pine Hollow every Sunday, to sit under the tree, and read to Coda. As for Coda, he retired officially, though Granger never told him that. He still showed up to the station each morning, still rode in the passenger seat when calls came in, still walked the perimeter of the property like something might return from the shadows. But mostly, he lay in the grass outside the old barn, listening, always listening. One afternoon, a small group of school kids on a field trip visited the memorial. Their teacher knelt beside the plaque and told them the story of a sheriff who didn't look away, of a little girl who refused to forget, and of a dog who heard the cries no one else could. A boy raised his hand. What kind of dog was he? The teacher smiled. The kind that never needed a badge to be a hero. Some stories don't end with applause. Some stories end with a quiet morning, a cup of coffee cooling on a porch rail, and the soft snoring of a dog by your feet, his chin resting on your boot, like the world is finally calm enough to sleep. That was Sheriff Thomas Granger's life now. 6 months had passed since the barn was torn down, since Margaret Dawson's name stopped appearing in every headline, since children who once lived in shadows finally ran through sunlit fields again. But in Pine Hollow, the weight of it all never truly left. And Coda? He still knew where to sit when the wind turned heavy. The barn was gone now, replaced by a community garden and a bronze statue of a boy reaching up toward the light. The sculpture had been funded by donations from 6 different states. On the base were the names of the 31 children recovered from the Dawson Network. And one more, Coda, hero without a voice. Every Sunday afternoon, school buses pulled up. Families brought their kids. Some left flowers. Others left drawings. One little girl left a tennis ball and a note that simply read, "Thank you for hearing me." Sheriff Granger never got used to the attention. They asked him to speak at law enforcement conferences, universities, trauma centers, even Congress. He turned most of them down. But when he was invited to Washington, D.C. to accept a medal on Coda's behalf from the Department of Justice, he knew he couldn't say no. The ceremony was televised. Coda wore a blue service vest and stood calmly as a crowd of decorated officers and national officials applauded. The Secretary of Defense called him the most effective non-human officer of the decade. But when Granger stepped to the mic, he didn't speak about Coda's nose or training or bravery. He said this: "We teach officers to follow evidence. This dog followed pain, and he never got it wrong." After the ceremony, the DOJ awarded Coda an honorary rank, Deputy First Class, with a custom collar engraved with the badge number 107, the number of days it took to dismantle the Dawson network. Back in Pine Hollow, the town threw a celebration at the local high school gym. Mayor Tully called it the day we thanked the dog who saved us. There were banners, a giant cake, and rows of kids holding up "Thank you Coda" signs drawn in crayon. Coda sat on stage beside Granger, tail wagging slightly but mostly unfazed by the fuss. He didn't need parades, just people to be safe. Boone was promoted to chief deputy and now ran day-to-day operations at the station. Rivera was assigned to a new federal task force that focused on shutting down trafficking disguised as charity programs. And Eliza? She thrived. She'd started 5th grade in Nashville. Her favorite subject was science, and she still sent drawings to the sheriff every month, usually of Coda flying through the sky wearing a cape. Granger kept each one in a folder in his desk, and every time he opened it, he smiled. The town changed in quiet ways. More people volunteered at the local foster home. Background checks became a priority, not a formality, and nobody ignored strange sounds in the night anymore. One boy said it best during a class discussion. "We don't just look out for trouble now, we listen for it." As for Coda's health, age had begun to show. His joints were slower, especially on colder mornings. His eyes clouded a bit in the left corner. But every time Granger laced up his boots, Coda still trotted to the door, tail wagging like he was ready to track down one more secret. Because to him, retirement didn't mean rest. It meant being close, watching, listening. The job never truly ended. Not for dogs like him. One day, Granger took him to the edge of the county where a new shelter had been built in Coda's name. The Coda Center for Healing and Rescue. It was designed to serve kids who had survived trauma, offering therapy, art programs, and canine-assisted emotional support. Eliza came to the ribbon cutting. She wore a purple shirt that said "Survivor and Storyteller." Before the ceremony started, she knelt beside Coda and whispered something in his ear. Granger asked what she said. She grinned. "I told him I'm not scared of thunder anymore." Later that week, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office. It was postmarked from Baltimore. Inside was a check for $25,000 made out to Heroes for Animals. The memo line read, "For the one who listened first." Attached was a short note. The children were not the only ones rescued that day. Some of us watched from behind desks and walls and silence. That dog didn't just hear pain. He gave us permission to feel it, too. Anonymous donor. Granger kept the letter in his top drawer. Some days he pulled it out and reread it over lunch. Other days he didn't need to. He just looked down at the floor where Coda always lay and nodded. Years later, long after Coda passed on, they buried him beneath the oak tree in the community garden where the barn once stood. The children laid small stones shaped like hearts on his grave. Granger placed a silver whistle beside them. He never used it, but Coda would have heard it, if ever needed again. And Pine Hollow? It never forgot. The schools taught kids how to speak up when something felt wrong. The sheriff's office kept Coda's badge hanging in the entryway. And on the first Sunday of every June, people came from all over the country to honor the memory of a dog who didn't just save lives. He reminded people how to listen. Thank you for following this journey with us, through heartbreak, truth, courage, and healing. This story was inspired by real canine heroes and the children whose voices are too often overlooked. We hope it moved you, challenged you, and most of all, reminded you that healing can begin with one bark, one truth, one person who dares to care. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever met a dog or a person who changed your life just by listening? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more stories that honor the loyalty, courage, and unseen strength of animals like Coda. Because sometimes the ones who never speak say the most.